Well, hey there YouTube, it's Petey Two Finger, and I am going to quickly try to go through my micro rig. So this is the MP3 player. This plays the drum tracks. So those files are on this, this is a little memory card here, and that plugs into this MP3 player, which has an EQ button, which is nice. 5 different EQs. And then over here on the other side is the play, pause, rewind, fast forward. And I've duplicated those controls here. So there's a master power switch, then there's an EQ. That EQ is a NJM BBE 2150 chip board. It's a little board. It's got a power input, then a stereo audio in and a stereo audio out. And there's a spot to, basically you can hook up a switch or use a jumper. So it's 3 little connectors sticking up, and you can slide a jumper over 2 of those, move it here or move it here, and that will bypass or engage this EQ. Now if you had a bass control, a mid-range control, and then a treble control, and you took the bass and turned it up a little bit, and then maybe leave the mid-range alone, and then take the treble and turn that up a little bit, you'd have what they call a smile curve, and that's exactly what this achieves. This little board. If I have an EQ, I find myself setting it like that. So this is one way to do it really affordably and with a single switch, but you can adjust it. So in combination of using the onboard presets and then this switch, I can get where I need to be. So as you can see here, it powers up high, and then it goes to the USB, which is this little blue dongle, and it goes to track 1, and now it's playing. I'm going to go ahead and hit the pause, which is just duplicating this pause button here. You can hit play again here, pause it again here. So I basically, these 3 buttons here, I ran wires down to the play, fast forward and rewind, or fast forward here and rewind here. So if we're going to fast forward, go to track 2, track 3, track 4, now it's going to start playing, and then we're going to go back to track 1. Now the deal with this knob, I wanted to run a pair of speakers that would handle like the low end, and then some like tweeters or high end speakers. So you can do that coming right off of the output of this EQ. Basically, there's no input for this. This has this memory card, it just plays out. So there's a single output cable that goes to the EQ input, and then out of the EQ to a preamp board, which is just like an audio booster on this control here. And why I did that was because I want to run 2 pairs of speakers. And that third jack, that's a smaller jack, that's like a headphone cable, like a 3.5 millimeter or an 1/8 inch they call it, and then these are 1/4 inch. So what I did, on the output of the preamp, there's 2 sets of cables that go off. One cable goes to this one, the other cable goes to this one, but then this one splits over to here. Now you can't use both of these at once. You have to pick one or the other, but you can use these 2 or these 2 or these 2. So how that works is one pair of those jacks, one of those sets, goes to this little speaker, which has 4 batteries which sit on top. And I should mention, this has 4 batteries in, but it's a 3-pack with a 1. The 3-pack powers this at 12 volts and the EQ at 12 volts. The 16-volt line goes to this, because this, the preamp, it needs to see at least 14 volts because there's a 7812 voltage regulator on that board. And in the information where I bought this, it said, oh, it runs from 5 to 24 volts DC. No, it doesn't. If there's a 7812, which is a voltage regulator, that means it needs to see 14 to like 36 volts. Anything from 36 volts DC down to 14. If you get below 14, like if let's say you hit it with 13 volts, it won't run, because a voltage regulator, this is a 7812, it puts out 12 volts. It needs at least 2 volts above its output threshold, which is 12 volts. So 12 volts plus 2 is 14. You need to hit this with 14. So the switch has 2 sides to it. It's a DP-DT switch. So you just run, the way you hook up the battery pack is there's a 3 and a 1, and they're all connected, but you run the outputs at different points. You like test it out with your meter, see where you can get 12 volts, see where you can get 16, and then run wires from there and run that through that switch. So it is fused. There's an external fuse for the 12 volt system, and there's an internal fuse for the preamp. So it's a little keep you on your toes. It's not ideal. I probably should have put a pair of external fuses. But I really like using these baking tins. I get these at Goodwill. They're little bread tins. And then I'll cut a, there's a cabinet company where I get this type of wood, and usually I'll get it where it's pre-cut in the right like width. So I only have to do one cut and then round out the edges. And then I just run some fasteners, 4 fasteners, and there you go. So we've got one end coming out because there's 2 audio outputs on that. We have our boostered output, which makes sure you can run 2 and it won't sound funky, to this speaker, which has a 16 volt battery pack with the internal amp. There's the volume control. Here's a power switch. It's got a 1/4 inch and an 1/8 inch or a 6.5 and a 3.5 mil adapter. This connector no longer connects to these speakers. This is an Energy brand speaker, and it's a really good bookshelf speaker. The magnet for the tweeter is huge, but this is really not a lot of bass. This is more of a treble-y speaker, high end. It's treble and then upper mid-range. Now, this connector here normally is what your amplifier out going into the speaker. This is no longer connected to that. The amplifier is built into this amp. It's inside of here. And one channel goes to this speaker here through the crossover. The other channel output goes to these connectors. So if you run a wire from here to another speaker, that'll be the other side then of a stereo pair. So the idea with this is kind of trebly, and I'm going to run a bullet tweeter that's in a speaker box for the other side. So these 2 are going to be really the high end for the system. A lot of treble, a lot of good treble, and that'll enable us to hear the cymbals really well. Now there is 2 outputs, so we're probably coming out of that little jack with just a regular 3.5 mil to 3.5 cable going into that, and then I've got another cable that's an adapter cable. It's got the larger size 1/4 inch that busts down to the 1/8 inch, and that's going to plug into here. This is a 50 by 2. There is 6 batteries in here, so it's 24 volts. So the battery packs are over here on this board. If you were to open this up, you'd see there's 6 batteries here. The power, it's a click-clack pot. This is a stereo pot. So there's the LED and then this fuse. It's a 5 amp fuse. Here is the input. There's the 3.5 inch, 3.5 mil input, and then these are the speaker main outputs. So this is going to drive, there's like a sub-ish speaker that we have. It's an Energy brand. It's a really good speaker, and it's got a 6.5 inch woofer. It's like a super woofer. It really gives the kick drum very well. And I only have one of those. There was only one of them at the recess store. It was like $3.99 for that speaker. It's a beautiful speaker. It's big, heavy. It's got a big port on the back. And so then for the mate, we're going to use probably this DAS German speaker I have. It's got an 8-inch. It's an 8-inch mini PA speaker. So those will be the mains. And again, this system is playing the drum beats. These are our backing tracks. So we'll have 4 speakers, 2 big ones, and then 2 little ones for the treble. And this is the amp that's pushing the big ones. It's a TPA 3116 D2 stereo. Excuse me, TPA 3116 stereo 50 by 2 Class D amp board. And will it be running 50 by 2? Probably not. I have to look at the ohmage of these speakers, but I mix and match speakers on these amps all the time, and it doesn't really affect it. Here is what my guitar is going to be running through. This is a same thing. It's a 50 by 2. Power LEDs on. It's a pink power LED, and it's got a stereo master volume control. Here's it's got a 1/4 inch stereo input, and then these 2 speaker outputs here, and then there is that EQ. This is that Smile Curve, the BBE 2150, or Aphex Oral Exciter. Do you say BBE Sonic Maximizer? It's a little circuit board. It's about this big, and they cost around $4 or $5. It's power in, and they want to see 12 volts, I think. Yeah, 12 volts. There is stereo audio input, stereo audio output, and then those 3 pins to put a jumper on to either bypass it or engage it. And typically what I will do is just have a toggle switch, and I'll run wires from those 3 pins to that switch to achieve that functionality of bypassing or engaging this Smile EQ. So it makes quite a difference on the speakers that I run for the guitar. Is a Radio Shack Minimus 7, which is a little steel bookshelf speaker. It's a biaxial, so there's a woofer and a tweeter, and I've got 3 of those. I've got a pair that are here that I use for monitoring as a B set, like how they have Yamaha NS10s. Like I've got some real deal $800. I forget who makes them. They're 6.5 inch woofers, but those are flat studio monitors. They're really good. And then for my colored, like my Air, my high-end shit, I have another separate amp that pushes those Minimus 7s. They're clones of the Minimus 7. And actually the drivers are a little better quality in those. I've taken them out and compared them, listened to them, swapping it out with the Radio Shack version. So on the other side, I've got an Infinity brand speaker, which is a little taller, a little wider, but it's still that smaller bookshelf style design. And that one puts out a little bit more. Like at the same level, maybe the impedance is different, but it seems to be a little brighter and run a little hotter. Now I do have an RCA bookshelf set with larger. And I've got all kinds of options here. So depending on whatever I want to run, but again, this is supposed to be smaller. This rig was supposed to be so my wife and I can take this stuff with minimal effort, not real heavy, not using 15 or 12 inch speakers. That's the point. And we could it's nice out, let's go sit on the patio, maybe play a little bit quieter, and the cops won't come. And there's some parks very near here. We went Sunday and tested this out, and we had to go to 3 places to find a place that wasn't taken because it was the weekend and people were there using it. But her bass is a bit more of a challenge, as it always is with a mini bass amp. You really need a 15-inch speaker or 4 10s, at least 2 10s. This was an Altec Lansing subwoofer, computer sub. So it's got a 4-pack of batteries on it and an input. It used to sit like this, so I cut the feet off. Here were some legs that came out, and then this came out here. with additional legs. I cut all that off. And it's got a real beefy subwoofer speaker with a magnet, heavy magnet on it. This is a 16 volt battery pack, and it's got a 30 watt amp board in it. Now, this is a bass guitar EQ harness. So on eBay, you can get these things. It's a little black box with a 9 volt harness and then 3 pots, and you wire this into your bass guitar. You route it out for a 9 volt battery, and then you have an active EQ. It's almost like having active pickups, but this is an active EQ is what it is. So this is a bass guitar EQ, which is works really good on this to trim some of the lows down so you don't fart out the speaker. Now, I do have a 100 watt mono amp board coming. These are TPA 3116, which is a 100 watt Class D chip amp. These are 50 by 2, so there's two 50 watt channels. The D2, the TPA 3116 D2 mono is just 100 watt. And I've used those many times in building amps. I've got all kinds of amps here that I've built using this same board, and they work really good. Typically, you run them off 24 volts, so when this comes in, I just ordered it, I'm going to remove this 4-pack and put a double 3-pack, get 6 batteries to hit 24 volts. So, hey Donna, would you shut that door if you're talking, please? Can you shut the door, please, if you're talking? I can hear you loudly out here. I'm sorry, I was distracted. So this here, it has a master volume, high, mid, and low, and then the switch connects to the mute channel. So you press this in, turn the power on, and then release it, and it barely pops. If you turn this thing on dry without hitting that mute, it pops really loudly. So I had built this, I had tested it. At last minute, I cut the mute switch in, then we took it out and it didn't work. And when I got it home, the amp board was blown. So I don't know if it bounced around in there and shorted out on something. I'm guessing that's what happened, but I redid it. And in redoing it, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to rebuild this because it's, we took it out and we did play through it. On the top here, there's this Velcro tabs and a thing called the Korg Pandora PX5. It's a little thing. It's about the size of a pack of 100 cigarettes if you elongated it and made it a little flatter. So it sits up here, there's an input and an output, stereo out. So I made a custom splitter cable, and it has bass patches. So the splitter cable throws one channel to that little white amp, and the other channel to this CS540 Magnetism Shield twin woofer speaker system. So this is rated at 60 watts of peak power. It's got a crossover, and there's a tweeter in the center here. And I put a 16 volt battery pack. So you load that up with batteries, and then you merely take this cable and plug it in here, and it comes on. And then you've got a small input and a larger input and a volume control that sits on the amp, because there's an internal amp on this. So this thing, it actually sounds pretty good as a bass amp. Again, when we went out the other day, excuse me guys, I've got to turn the air on. It's 78 in here, and I'm too uncomfortable. When we went out, there was people were at all of the pavilions. There's 3 parks right near our house that have little pavilion, and at 2 of them there were huge parties. At the 3rd one, it was just 3 people and a child, and they were like eating some Kentucky chicken or whatever carry-out food they had bought. So I said to my wife, I bet those 3 people are going to finish eating and go home, because it was 83 degrees with 91% humidity. It was nasty. So we unloaded the car and set everything up on a picnic table that was 20 yards away from this pavilion, and we played 4 songs, and they left. Then we ran everything over inside the pavilion, and boy, I got to tell you, night and day difference, especially on the lower frequencies. the amount of natural amplification that comes from playing in that structure with the roof on it, the pavilion, was more than you would think. You pick up a real lot, especially on the lows. So where the lows were, we had to turn the amps up, and maybe when you played certain notes lower down, it would distort or fart out on the speaker. Inside the pavilion, we could reduce the level on the amplifiers, and it didn't fart out as bad, and it was way louder. So my goal is to find a happy balance here. I've got a cabinet with a 12 in it, with a Fender 12, and I've got another cabinet with an EV 12 that's a really good bass speaker. Then I've got Gauss 2481 speakers. They're like 60-pound magnets. And we have a sub. We've got the one that we normally use, but this is supposed to be the micro rig. It's supposed to be smaller. So what I'm really hoping is that when I put the 100-watt amp board in here and add on the additional 8 volts, that this will do what it needs to do. This is good because it has this 3-band EQ, and I can reduce the bass frequencies, which is what you need to do to get that to work right. So that's the micro rig. It is a work in progress. It's a bad idea. This is a challenging thing. The challenge comes in the low end. That's really hard, is getting a bass guitar to sound good without the use of a 15-inch speaker and 4 10s, because that's really what you need. You need a 15, right? I mean, isn't that just like? So I'm pissing into the wind here, but I really like using these baking tins, and these are neat little amps with the internal batteries. I could just as well put an external power jack on it and run these off of, which I'm sure I will. I'm sure there'll come a thing where I'm like, I want to run that on the patio and we have AC, so let me open it up. Rather than recharge the batteries, just cut in a 2.1 mil inner diameter, 5.5 mil outer diameter DC jack and wire that in appropriately. And then I could run it off of a laptop power supply. But yeah, that's the micro rig. I don't want to make this video an hour and a half, so I'm going to cut you guys loose. I love to hear your thoughts on this and comment if you have any ideas. I know about the Phil Jones briefcase where he uses 4-inch woofer drivers. Like, I think there's 8 of them in the Phil Jones briefcase. I don't know, like, if I could figure a way to get some small woofers that worked on a bass guitar and combine that with a... See, the reason I was stoked about using this is because this woofer, it comes in this box, meaning this box is ported for bass. Now, what numbers are they trying to hit? Are they trying to hit numbers that live in a bass guitar frequency, or are they hitting numbers lower than that for sub bass? So it is what it is. Like I said, I'm pissing up against the wall. If you guys got any comments or ideas, I'd appreciate it. But this was a fun way to spend midsummer. It's so unbelievably humid and hot in Chicago. I'm sure it is where you are too. I don't mean to complain, but keeping myself busy with projects like this is certainly helpful for me retaining my sanity until we run into a little cooler times. So hopefully we'll have nicer weather and we'll be able to take the full rig out, because that's really the main thing, is what I've already built, because I already have a 600 watt PA system that we play through to great effect. All right, you guys, take care of yourselves, hug your pets, try to stay cool, and peace.